Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about books and kind of the year of books that I've read. And most specifically, we're going to be talking about the 5 books I really did love this year and the 5 books I really did not like. We'll also have 2 honorable mentions for books I loved and 2 DNFs of books I just could not finish. And I'm actually really happy. This year was the first year I decided to try to keep a book journal, to try to keep track of what I was reading. I'm gonna be honest, I did not do a very good job. I did terrible at keeping track of the books I was reading. I started having a little journal and then writing about what the books were about and then doing little paintings to talk about the books. And the rest of it is empty. But I did really work hard at trying to keep track of which books I've read and then also what kind of rating they got. I'm not the best at rating. I feel like I don't really have the best way of rating a book yet. I'm still trying to figure out my idea, but the idea is 5 stars stick with me and I think about them a lot. 4 stars were really well written and I was intrigued. 3 stars were mediocre. 2 stars were like, okay. 1 star was I didn't like this book, and DNF is I couldn't finish this book, of course, because could not finish or did not finish. One of the other things I really tried to do as well is I tried doing a book bingo. And if you're interested, maybe I'll talk about that at the end of my video of my book bingo, what I was able to finish, and the fact that I did complete my book bingo this year. So maybe I'll tell you which books I hit on my book bingo. My handwriting is terrible, but I figured I can talk about it a little bit at the end of the video. Just if you're interested, stay tuned. I'll talk about book bingo. But I did keep track of my reads this year. I read, I think, somewhere in the 40s. I don't read a lot, of course, because I have a job, I have other things going on, but I do really find reading pleasurable and a joy and just a great way to escape and visit other worlds and kind of have other ideas and also get introduced to new ideas. So I do enjoy reading, so I do like to keep track of which books I'm reading just because I like to kind of go back and think about them later. And that's one of the reasons why this video was put together, because now I can tell you 5 books I loved, 5 books I didn't like, and go from there. So with all that said, let's go ahead and jump into my 2 DNFs, because I think they didn't even make it on my list of books I didn't like. They just made it on the list of books I just didn't want to finish reading. And DNFs are generally books that I will give a book 100 pages. 100 pages to intrigue me, get me interested, and unfortunately these 2 books just didn't do it for me. The first one is Crusoe's Daughter by Jane Garden. This is about a young woman who ends up living on an island, but she ends up living on this island for 80 years. The imagery and the writing of this book is really pretty, but that's all it has. It doesn't have anything that's really exciting happening for me. I didn't find there was any motivations for anything to happen. It just felt so sluggish. Like I was forcing myself to continue reading this, and by the 150, 200 page mark, I just said I can't do it anymore. I tried giving it a chance and I just couldn't do it anymore. And really it's about a young woman who lives on an island and her motivations of wanting to continue living on this island in solitude. And then by the end of the book something sweet happens, but it's just, I looked up spoilers because I just wasn't interested in continuing reading it. This might be a book for you, again, if you like that kind of writing, but not for me. The other one that I didn't end up finishing is The Cloisters by Katie Hayes. I felt so bored. I felt like I was waiting for things to happen, and then we would have this beautiful imagery and also just very interesting. There was some interesting character development, but it just wasn't moving forward for me. And I felt like I was just consistently waiting for things to happen. Like I needed like moments of, here's something that happened, and then go down. So we needed a kind of a hill climbing moment. And it just wasn't happening. And then there was a point where I was thinking, there might be something in this book that may not be for me. This story is about a young woman who ends up working at a museum, and she ends up kind of running into some spiritual, supernatural things, and by the end of the story, like I said, I didn't finish it. I ended up looking up spoilers for it because I just wanted to know what was going to end up happening. And I'm very happy I didn't finish this story. It's just not a story for me. I think I would have finished it and been very disappointed or very upset in the sense of how it ended. It just doesn't fit with me. It doesn't sit well with me. And that's perfectly fine. The idea of the story was really cool. I liked the idea of a young woman working in a museum and interacting with supernatural things, but it just didn't have enough oomph for me. And so I ended up DNFing it about halfway through and then looking at spoilers. Again, if you liked this book, good on you. I think each of us have different types that we like and different stories, different writing, different everything that we end up enjoying. And so some books are for us and some books are not. And these two just ended up not being for me. And now I have 5 books that I ended up finishing, but then ended up giving it a low rating. And they're just books I just could not... They either made me really frustrated and I disliked them because they made me frustrated, didn't make any sense, or I just don't think about them because they left no impact on my life. And if you like these books, I'm really happy for you. I'm happy you found joy in the books I'm about to talk about. I would actually like to hear that in the comments below. Maybe you liked these books and I would love to hear as to why. And for me, they just did not fit well. And the first one I'm going to talk about, I actually left in the US because I finished it while we were there, and I just said, this book does not need to come home with me. And that's The Familiars by Stacey Halls. I really like Stacey Halls as a writer, at least Mrs. England. I thought Mrs. England was really well written. I loved the story, I loved the atmosphere, but The Familiars was just not for me. The idea is that the story is about witches and they're... You know, it's funny, I don't really remember what the story is about. Personally, I thought it was going to be about familiars, the idea of witches having creatures or animals to do their bidding. So normally it's like toads or rats or mice or cats, and that's a familiar, so kind of connected to a witch. And I thought this book was going to be about that, and it ended up not being about that. And now I can't even remember what the story was about because it didn't have any impact on me. And that's one of the reasons why it's a 1 star for me. I can't remember it. And I'm sorry. I wish I could tell you more about it, but I don't have it with me, so I can't read the back, and I didn't look it up before I started this video. So if you're interested in learning more about The Familiars, I will leave a link down in the description below. But it just wasn't a book for me, and it's about witches and not The Familiars. The next book I'm going to talk about that I did not enjoy, and it frustrated me because it didn't make any sense, was After Me Comes the Flood by Sarah Perry. I really disliked this book. I thought there was no character development, so I didn't understand why the characters had any motivations of doing anything. We have a man who wanders around, stumbles upon a house where all of the people in the house know who he is, and there's a reason for him to be there, but it's not really explained, and I don't feel like it's explained ever in the story as well. And it was just like frustrating because I never understood what any of the characters wanted. And it has some really good imagery. I think the imagery was really well done, and yeah, but I'm a character-driven reader. I like to know why my characters are doing certain things, and I just felt like this one had there was nothing there, and I felt frustrated by the time I finished it, and I just didn't really like it. So there's also a lot of religious connections in here, and I think I'm just generally not somebody who does read things that are connected to religious analogies and metaphors and such, and so I think that's another reason why I didn't really like it. Another one that made me very frustrated for reading because I just felt no motivation for the characters was Murder Most Royale. This one I thought was going to be really cute and really sweet in the sense of a murder story, a murder mystery, and I thought it was going to be a fun read. It's by S.J. Bennett, sorry I forgot to mention that, and it's about the Queen kind of doing a murder mystery. So the Queen has had a murder on her beach and she's trying to figure out who did the murder, and we find the motivations of characters, of course. I mean, I'm kind of confused as to why the Queen is doing the investigation, but you know, it's a fun little story. However, there was something that happened at the end of this story where I didn't understand why it needed to be included. And I think for being a book that looks cute and sweet and wonderful, or like, not wonderful, but like, just like a cute murder mystery, there should have been a trigger warning, I think, and that made me very upset that this one event happened, and I didn't understand why it needed to be told in the story. I don't think it had any need to be in the story. So that's actually one of the reasons why I just rated this so low. I also didn't find it very moving. It didn't move forward for me. It was just like, I need to finish this to figure out who did the murder. But then you kind of figure out who did the murder pretty early on. So it was just like, eh. So Murder Mystery was just not a book for me, and that's okay. The next one is The Hungover Games by Sophie Haywood. This was okay in the sense of being a book about a young mother who ends up being a single mother. She's surprised, she gets pregnant without expecting so, and we end up following her journey of raising this daughter and her struggles of parenthood, and it's supposed to be kind of a drama comedy, and maybe I didn't get the comedy because of the British humor in the story. I do think it was a drama, but I don't know if I loved it in the sense of, I wish it was more comedy and not just drama. I think that there needed to be a break of all of the heaviness that this character went through, and I don't think there was, for me, a break of that. And maybe because of the British humor, maybe because I didn't get it, but I just wanted something that was going to be more lighthearted, and this ended up being too heavy. And maybe it's because I read it at the wrong time, and that happens, but I just don't have any positive memories of reading this, and it hasn't stuck with me. It just kind of sits on my shelf, and I look at it and I'm like, oh yeah, I read that book. And that's kind of how I feel about The Hungover Games. I almost said Hangover Games. The Hungover Games. The last one I have on my list is Agatha Christie and A Haunting in Venice. This is also called The Halloween Party. I just didn't feel very interested in the second half of this story. I think the first half was really well done. I was really interested in what was happening. I was intrigued. I was wanting to know what was going on. You kind of figured out who the murderer was kind of early on. But normally with an Agatha Christie book, if you don't know who Agatha Christie is, she's a murder mystery writer, and she was, she's no longer living. And this is out of the Poirot's perspective, so a French investigator. And the French investigator gets called to different murder scenes, and then has to kind of put the puzzles together and figure out who did the murder. We kind of figure out who did the murder pretty early on. I don't think it was on purpose, but we get you can put the puzzle pieces together. And I think one of the things that just kind of threw me off of this story was in the very middle of the story, in the very middle of the book, you just kind of lose the momentum of the story, and it just gets really slow and sluggish. And if you haven't recognized, if a book gets slow and sluggish and there's just no motivations or no momentum, I generally lose interest. And that's just how I am as a reader. And if there's no just oomph or continued movement, I just don't really want to continue reading it. I did end up finishing it, and it was okay. It was just not one of the best of Agatha Christie's, and I think my next goal would be to read one of her better stories, or one of her more popular stories, like The Murder on the Orient Express. So this Agatha Christie book was just not one of the ones for me. Now we get to move on to the exciting part. We're going to be talking about my 5 favorite books of this year. I have 2 honorable mentions that were really, really well done. I really enjoyed them. They just didn't hit the mark completely. So I'm going to talk about those 2 books first. The first one is Dracula by Bram Stoker. I thought this was such an entertaining book for being a classic. I really enjoyed it. It did take me a bit of time to read because the writing style is a bit different. I loved the point of view through the diary entries. I thought that was a really interesting way of writing a story and getting us involved and making us also feel like we're part of the story and part of the Dracula kind of idea. The one character that made me no longer have this at my 5-star, I love this book, was Van Helsing. Van Helsing was so irritating. I found him so frustrating to read. I didn't like his character. I didn't think he was entertaining. I thought he was so... ugh. That's the best way I can describe Van Helsing to you. I find him ugh. So I love Dracula. I just don't like Van Helsing. If you don't know what Dracula is, it's about a vampire. The vampire is, he is deciding to move his grounds, his home base. And we get to follow the story of a couple people wanting to figure out what's happening, noticing vampires or vampire-esque incidences, and the discovery of vampires, and then discovery of Dracula, and what ends up kind of happening in the last 10 pages. Also, the last 10 pages went by really fast. It was almost too fast for me. The other honorable mention is The Maid. I thought this story was so intriguing and very different from some other stories I ended up reading. We ended up following a young maid, that's why it's called The Maid. Oh, and it's by Nita Pros. And we end up following this young woman who works at a hotel. She's been at the hotel for many, many years. She's a consistent worker. She's very faithful. She does what she's supposed to do, but she's also a little... She has a hard time breaking away from things that she knows, and she has to be on schedule. She has to be on her kind of points, and she has a hard time reading people. She doesn't know how to read feelings. She doesn't know how to read sarcasm. She doesn't know how to read that kind of interaction, or if you're not being direct, she can't kind of understand that. And I found that as a reader who doesn't deal with that kind of situation, it was really interesting to see a perspective that does have to deal with that in a daily life situation. And so I think the author did a really good job based on kind of just the feeling I got from the story of also feeling very sympathetic and empathetic for our main character. She ends up getting involved into a murder. We end up following her story as she ends up getting involved in a murder, and we see how the story develops in her involvement and also other characters' involvements and how they handle her and how they interact with her. And I think it ended up being really, like it says, a gripping whodunit, and I think that is very true. I think it's a gripping whodunit. I just had a hard time getting in at the very beginning. I think I had a hard time connecting with the character, and that's not on the writer. It was more on me, and so I had to actually sit down and just get invested in the story. As soon as I got invested in the story, then I fell in love with it. I really enjoyed this. I think it was well written. I think the story was well done, and I thought it was a great novel. Yeah. And a great whodunit. So I didn't just dislike all my whodunits. I liked this one. I liked this one a lot. Now, for my 5 favorite books of the year. The one I've most recently finished is Unlondon by China Mieville. I don't know how to pronounce that name. But if you're looking for something more like Neil Gaiman, more fantastical and just whimsical and magical, I highly recommend this. This is full of beautiful imagery. It's full of beautiful adventure, and the character development is so great, and it's just so well done. And I love the fact that this has small little pictures throughout it. I think it definitely adds to the story. I felt more invested in it. I read this when I was 15, and I've been thinking about this book ever since, and I've been wanting to reread it. I finally found it at Pal's bookstore in Portland this last year, in October, and I picked it up and I read it, and I just love it just as much as I did back then. I highly recommend this for anybody. If you love Neil Gaiman, like Coraline, where it's like dark and weird and uncomfortable, but it's also fantastical and whimsical. To tell you about the story, it's about a young girl, 2 young girls who end up finding this other London, so Unlondon. So you have London, and then you have the upside down world from Unlondon almost, where everything else goes to kind of live a second life. And we end up following the story of this smog trying to take over London, or Unlondon, and these girls having to find a way to destroy the smog and kind of fulfill this prophecy. And it's really beautiful. It's a wonderful story, and I highly, highly recommend it. It's one of my favorites, I think, of this year. It is one of my favorites of this year, but I think it's like one of the top ones. My camera died, so we're going to go ahead and continue on now that I've charged a little bit, and we're going to start with the last 4 books I've been talking about for my best books of 2023. And the next one is going to be The Prairie of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. I read this at the very beginning of the year of 2023, so January 2023, and this is my first long-form fantasy, and I really enjoyed this book. I love the fact that it's a 1-book series. There's other books with it. I believe that there's a prequel that just came out in the middle of this year, I think. And I've just read this one. I really enjoy it. I'm looking forward to reading the other one as well, but I don't feel the need to jump right in before I forget everything that's happened. This book is about multiple different characters, but we kind of follow really closely with 3 women. The queen, a mage, and a dragon rider. And it's so amazing and so intense and so interesting on how the world is built and how everything is functioning together. And it's also truly like one of the coolest things, the fact that we have a lot of female main characters and a lot of women just being powerful and strong. And I thought it was so well done. And being my first fantasy, this was going to be the risk of I'm going to love it and I'm going to continue reading more fantasy, or I'm going to hate it and I'm going to think, long form fantasy is not my thing. However, I'm excited to pick up new ones. I'm excited to read other long form fantasy. I have a couple books that I've picked up over the year, like Wheel of Time. I remember trying to read that when I was younger, and my dad really got into it, so now I'm really interested in getting into it as well. And I'm just really interested in learning, or I'm really interested in picking up other long-form fantasies. But Prairie of the Orange Tree is really great for anybody who's wanting to read fantasy but not wanting to dive into a series. It's going to be 3 to 10 to 15 books long, and it's a really good story to be invested in. The next one is actually kind of a surprise for me, and I didn't think I would ever pick up anything like this, but I started reading manga this year and I've been really enjoying it. I decided I wanted to just kind of enter into that area. I've never been a graphic novel reader, a comic book reader, or a manga reader, and I thought, why not? It has pictures in it and it's fun and it's beautiful and the art is really nice. And I asked Gavin Reed's kind of a recommendation of where I should start, what's really going to get my heart really excited for manga, and he recommended Witch Hat Atelier. And I was like, okay, like it's about witches, it's supposed to be cute, I'm interested. And I picked this up, just the one, because I wanted to see what I was gonna think. And I fell in love with the characters. It's about a young girl who wanders into the world of magic and witches, and she's not supposed to be there, but she's just learning it and becoming part of it and trying to integrate her life into the witch world. And I think it's such a cute little manga. It's really fun to read, and I can pick it up and read it in a day. I have the next couple that I've read, and it's just a fun little thing to enjoy without having to invest a whole week or a whole day or anything like that. And it's just a quick little read that's cozy, comfortable, and perfect, I think, for anybody who likes something cute and cozy and whimsical. And if you haven't picked up any manga, I do highly recommend it. It's worth giving it a try, just seeing if you like it, and maybe Witch Hat Atelier could also be for you. And the next one, if you've watched my channel, I don't think you're gonna be surprised about, is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. I thought this was such a sweet, cozy book. It's about an orc named Viv who ends up putting down her sword and picking up a coffee cup, and it is just so freaking cute. And this is exactly what I would hope my bakery or my cafe to look like in the future, where people are warm and cozy and just want to come in and enjoy a wonderful treat. Of course, we have a little bit of a mystery or a bit of fantastical, troublesome situations going on in this story, but it's a quick, easy read. It delves into the fantasy world, but it's a very light fantasy. But we have wonderful characters that we get to follow along on this journey and the story. And if you're looking for something that's going to be new and fantastical, whimsical, cozy, coffee, this is going to be exactly the book you're looking for. If you haven't read it, I would highly recommend it. It's just warms my heart every time I think about it, and I ended up getting the second book of this one, and I'm looking forward to reading it at the beginning of the new year. And the last one, which I think I surprised myself the most on, another book I was really surprised I really loved was Broken by Jenny Lawson. It's a nonfiction talking about anxieties and depression and mental health and how she gets through life. And it's a very comedic kind of breakthrough or breakdown of her feelings and how she handles things. And I connected very, very well with Jenny Lawson throughout this book because it was just a way to be like, oh, I'm also seen. I can also go through these feelings and I'm not alone. And I think this was just such a lovely, lovely book to be able to read and say, hey, thank you, Jenny Lawson, and thank you for making me feel like I can also go through these feelings and not feel like a crazy person and just accept my little monsters I have. So Jenny Lawson does talk about her anxieties, depression, and mental health. She talks about how she handles it sometimes, how her family handles it, and how she handles it in her work and daily life, and also when it gets bad or when she's having good days. And they're just little stories. Each chapter is a different little story or a different antidote or a different situation, so you don't even have to read it from chapter to chapter. You can just pick a random chapter and enjoy it for what it is. There was one chapter I decided that may not be for me because it was causing my anxieties to get a little higher than I realized. I still enjoyed the chapter. It may have just not been a chapter for me in the future. But she has really great anecdotes in here. It's very funny. It's so easy to connect with her, and I think it's just a delightful little read, and I highly recommend it. So that's my 5 favorite books, my 5 worst books, 2 runners-up, and then 2 DNFs. So it was an interesting year of reading. I read more than I thought I was going to, but I've also realized that I'm not somebody who can read 100, 200 books a year. I just don't have the time. And congratulations to those people who can read that much. I think that's amazing. But for myself, I know that I can't do that. I have other things like my full-time job and baking and other projects that have just taken over some of my leisure time, and that's completely okay. I still love reading before I go to bed. It's a habit I've picked up a couple years ago, and instead of looking at my phone, I've decided to put my phone off to the side and read for the next 15 to 20 minutes before I fall asleep. And I've learned it's just a great way to shut down my brain, get myself kind of in the fantastical dreamy mode, and then also kind of have a nice peaceful sleep. And that's how I just started picking up reading more often, is just by giving myself a little bit of time each day to read a page or 2 or a little bit more if I'm really interested in the story. So I'm going to continue doing that next year, of course reading before going to bed, but also picking up new books, interesting books, and there's loads of books that I'm really interested in reading last year. It's really fun because in my journal I have books that I was wanting to read this year and I didn't read very many of them. I bought 2 of them, so I've bought Warrior Girl Unearthed and Remarkably Bright Creatures. But there are 20 other books on this list that I have not picked up, I haven't read, and they were the 23 books I was interested in reading this year. Yellowface is also one of the ones I actually ended up reading, but 20 other books. Oh, I also own Black Cake. So I own 4, read 1, and 19 I just didn't think about picking up, but that's okay. Sometimes we don't reach our goals, and that's completely all right. And to answer my bingo question at the very beginning of my video, so I reached a couple different markers, and I think it's really fun to kind of just keep a little bingo list or a little goal list and to kind of mark them off as I'm reading. So for my book bingo, like I had mentioned, I have a couple things on here. They were all just like little goals that I wanted to try to do this year. It was okay if I got it, it was okay if I didn't get it, but I thought doing book bingo would give me more of a chance to get a bingo. And I actually completed my goal. I have 1 bingo. I'm hoping to get maybe 1 more bingo before the end of the year, but I'll go ahead and tell you what my bingo ended up being. So I got a nonfiction, which was Broken, featuring the LGBT community, which was Detransition Baby. A graphic novel, which was Fable, a very, very fun and kind of creepy way of looking at the world of Disney, kind of. But it's like fairy tales, but dark fairy tales. Shorter than 100 pages, which was Cold Enough for Snow. This was very interesting and kind of hard for me to read. It was about a mother and a daughter trying to reconnect in their story together. It's only 100 pages. It's a little less than 100 pages, but this was definitely a read that I would love to read again. I just need to take my time through it too. And the last one, which is read the first book of a series, and that was Wildwood, which is kind of a middle grade novel, very cute, not for me, but definitely a very cute novel. And then I was able to complete a couple others. Sorry if you can't read my handwriting, but I was really excited that I got to complete some of them. So I am looking at doing another book journal next year. I love the idea of keeping track of which books I'm reading, just to kind of see what I have been reading, if I need to be picking up any other books. I would love to read more male authors. I tend to fall towards female authors, which is really funny. But I think I would like to read some more male authors next year. And I'm also looking forward to picking up more Japanese authors and South Korean authors. I've been looking at some books from these areas and writers from these areas. And I think this last year I read quite a few books and authors from Japan, and I loved these stories. I love the character-driven stories that I seem to be reading from Japanese authors, and I'm looking forward to reading more. So if you have any recommendations for any new books for me to read, I would love to hear them in the comments below. Or if you want to tell me your favorite books or your worst books of this year, I would also love to hear them. I think it's really interesting when I love a book and you guys dislike it, or I disliked a book and you guys love it. I would love to hear if you loved any of the books that I disliked or DNF'd, or if you liked the same ones as I did. I think it's always fun to talk about books. It's great to have different opinions and different ideas of what makes a good book, and I think it creates for a wonderful, wonderful discussion. So, with that being the end of the year, that was all of my books I've read this year. I think I'm going to get maybe one more in. I'm currently reading The Book Eaters, which I am enjoying very much, and When Women Were Dragons, I believe. I'm reading 2 books currently, and I'm hoping to finish them both before the end of the year, but if I don't, it's completely okay. And yeah, I really have enjoyed and loved this year with you guys. I think 2023 was wonderful and grand and had so many wonderful and happy moments in here. I reached 1,000 subscribers, which was really, really cool. I've met some of you online and I've talked to you guys a little bit more, and I've just really, really loved this time with you guys. So thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for being part of my life and my channel and my growth and everything. And I'm really looking forward to next year, 2024, with more baked goods, more books, and more cozy content, and just having a grand old time. So thank you again. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful New Year's. Have a guten Rutsch, which means have a good slide into the new year. And I will see you guys next week on Thursday in 2024. Until next time, you guys, have a wonderful New Year's. Ciao!